Most folks know Dan Lauria as a great actor from things like The Wonder Years and so many films and TV programs, but he's also a stage actor who has a play right now on the New York stage called Just Another Day, a play which he wrote. Join Dan Lauria and us. Stay with us on Personally Speaking. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and actor Dan Lauria joins me now. Dan is best known as the dad on the Emmy-winning ABC television show The Wonder Years. Dan was also seen on the Fox TV show Pitch and has appeared as a guest star in more than 70 television episodic programs and more than 20 movie of the week productions, plus a score of motion picture credits. Dan was also seen on Broadway as the legendary coach Vince Lombardi in Lombardi and A Christmas Story, the musical. Dan is currently starring with actress Patty McCormack in a play he has written called Just Another Day. It's a play that deals with the complexity of aging, memory loss, and connection. Dan is here with us today to talk about Just Another Day, his life, his career, and the values that sustain him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome back to Personally Speaking, actor and playwright Dan Lauria. We welcome Dan Lauria back to Personally Speaking. Everybody knows Dan is a great actor, which he is, but he's also now done something interesting where he's a playwright. Just Another Day is the play that's appearing on the New York stage. He's co-starring with Patty McCormack, and I'm just so glad. And I hope our listeners and viewers, especially those who are coming to the New York area in May or June this year, will go and see Just Another Day. But Dan, I've been reading the reviews. I like them very much, but I got to ask you, this is obviously a study of the experience we're all going through of aging.
Isn't that the truth?
What have you learned in writing about aging? What have you learned about yourself and your own attitude about aging?
Well, I think at the center of the play, and the reason why I started writing it is I think the biggest prejudice in our country right now, more so than any prejudice towards Black Americans, gay Americans, Latin Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and I say greater because it encompasses all of them,
Yeah.
is the prejudice to the aged.
Mm-hmm.
Every grant out there right now with these regional theaters, the one constant word is young. Young writers of diversity, young Black writers, young
Right.
Asian writers, young writers of Native American writers, as if that changes the words on the page.
Right. Right.
I mean, I know I'm old, but I went back to the public theater days with Joe Papp. When you submitted a play, it had to have two cover sheets. One had all the information, your age and your name, blah, blah. The second cover sheet only had the name of the play.
Okay.
They wrote an arbitrary number on both, number 47. And
Mm-hmm.
that top cover was put in a file. So the readers had no idea who sent it in, who they were,
Mm-hmm.
male or female. They just read the words. And I can't tell you, I mean, I've done over 60 plays. I've gotten awards all over the country for helping regional theaters. Good friends of mine would not even read the play because it was a 75-year-old writer.
Oh, yeah. You know,
So
yeah,
that's
that's
part
a
of the reason
prejudice
why I wrote it.
to face the prejudice and get people to open their minds. Last time I saw you on stage, you were playing Vince Lombardi. In his best days, how old a guy was he?
He died at 57.
Oh boy. Okay, so he never got to our age.
He never really got to old age. I was actually 10 years too old for the part, and I thought I would have to gray my hair and darken my hair.
Right.
But when we saw pictures of him, I didn't have to do anything.
No, you look just like him. You acted like you were perfect for that role, which I didn't know he died that young and stuff. Now let's go back in terms of family of origin. A lot of the insights we have about old age come very often from our own family. So until last year, was caring for my 102-year-old mom, my dad into his 80s. Your mom and dad, okay, did they have long life, and did you watch them through the process of aging?
Yeah, but my mother's side, her older sister, my Aunt Millie, lived to 105. I
Oh,
beat you
wow.
on that one, and my mother lived to 87.
Okay.
She was 7 years younger than my father. My father died at 87, so they died 7 years apart. But they didn't have any dementia. My mother was funny from the earliest day I can remember to the day she died. She was had a great sense of humor, and I really found out more about dementia and the difference between dementia
Mm.
and Alzheimer's only when I started really working on the play. A friend of mine's father, who I knew very well, we used to play softball together. He's 94 now, and he's in a home, assisted living for people with, and he'll remember me when he sees me, but he'll say, "Oh, I haven't seen you in years," and it'll be just 2 weeks ago I saw him. But if we talk about the Yankees, he
Right.
goes right back to when he was 5 years old, and he knows everybody's batting average, who played what, and then he works his way up, and eventually he'll go, "Oh, Dan, you would have loved it," and he brings me into the conversation. So what I've done in my play was substitute old movies. Whenever the
Okay.
two characters feel lost, if they say something like "Ain't that the truth, the awful truth," the other character goes, "Cary Grant and Irene Dunn," and they cling on this. It's like singing to someone, even sometimes with Alzheimer's. You sing a song, they know the
Comes
words.
right back. Comes right
Yeah.
back. And we're lucky to have had parents like that. Many of my classmates say their parents didn't even know them the last 5 or 10 years of their life. The test with my mom was always she was born in the time of Woodrow Wilson, and she could name every president. And then she'd come to the end every time and say, Barack Obama, as she called him. And then she'd say, and Donald Trump? I said, yes, mommy, and
Yeah,
Donald Trump.
it's
And
always
now,
with that question mark.
is this for real or is this a TV
Yeah.
show? Now
Yeah.
let's go to something else you're doing recently, and I'm going to go back to the play in a minute, but I was intrigued. We did an interview with Sean McNamara, the director of Reagan, the movie about Ronald Reagan. You played Tip O'Neill, right?
Yes, yes.
Tell
With
it.
Dennis Quaid playing Ronald Reagan, he was great to work with, very professional. And I got along with Dennis very well. He's one of those Republicans who does not support Trump.
Okay.
And I can relate to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now speaking of which, for those who don't know, Dan has a history not unlike most of us. We're all born in Brooklyn, but then back then they got out. We should have held on to those homes in Brooklyn, which are
Oh.
worth a fortune now. But you left Brooklyn with your family, moved out to Lindenhurst, Long Island. That suburban experience of growing up, good for you?
Oh, I got to tell you, Tim, sometimes I'm at a loss when they have actors talk about their childhood. And some great actors just had the terrible child. I mean, Tom Hanks lived in a car for a while. My parents were the two nicest people I've ever met. I loved growing up on Long Island. All I did was play ball when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I didn't even know we were poor till I got to college. I didn't know you got more than one gift at Christmas. No, you got your underwear and your pants and your shirt, and you got one gift, and you knew exactly what it was going to be because at Thanksgiving, your father said, "So, what do you want for Christmas this year?" And I'd say, "Well, Pop, I could use a new glove, baseball glove." And he would always say, "Well, I'll see what I can do." And at Christmas, there would be the glove, and I go, "Oh, Pop, this is great." And he goes, "Yeah, I had a feeling that's what you wanted." So,
Isn't
but
that
it was
something? He seemed
always,
to know. He seemed to know. Now,
Dave,
for
was
those
your
who
family
don't, go
like
ahead.
that too?
Oh yeah, it's exactly the same, and I don't think we were spoiled at all. And I think growing up in suburbia was a blessing. I would have enjoyed a little more time in Brooklyn, but I spend enough time in the city now that I'm happy with our Long Island upbringing. And this football thing, I'm intrigued because a lot of the parents in my church will say, "Well, I like to watch the game, but none of my kids are going to play. It's too dangerous." Did you know when you were playing football, a scholarship kid, by the way, that
Yeah.
that it was a dangerous game?
Well, we always knew it was a little dangerous, but we didn't have the stats that we
Mhm.
have today. That's one thing about Lombardi. Every Super Bowl, somebody calls me sports show to interview. And Lombardi taught physics and chemistry and Latin.
Wow.
And he would have understood all the medical reports of today. And I don't
Mhm.
hope he would have encouraged young kids to play.
Yeah.
When I played, we didn't know. It was, hey, it's better he's out there banging heads than getting drunk and driving cars and getting in trouble. We were never really in trouble because we were too busy playing ball.
And for those that don't know, Dan Lauria not only played football and was a scholarship college kid for that, but he also, interestingly enough, has a background as a veteran. Now, tell us, did you voluntarily join the Marines? And if you did, how was the experience?
Well, as you know, in the 70s, during the protests and everything, everybody got involved. And it wasn't so much that I was for the war or against. It's just where I grew up, every parent served. I just could not imagine serving. My father was in the Army, so to one up him, I joined the Marines while I was in. But I was very fortunate in that we had orders to go to Vietnam, but we were stopped at Okinawa because they were pulling Marines out. So we were always getting ready, floating off the coast, but never really going in. And at the very end of my tour, we were training South Vietnamese on Okinawa, and I went back in with a unit. But I'm speculating now, but we weren't there very long, a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden we get a message saying, "Get those Marines out of there." And I got a feeling somebody on a Joint Chiefs said didn't want to make it look like we were redeploying Marines into Vietnam. It would have been too much of a political issue. So I was very fortunate, to get out. I did, but you know how it was. We took a stand then, and there were traditional things. I don't know one of the guys I played ball with as a kid whose father wasn't a World War II vet. So we all went,
Yeah. And I'm the son of a Marine captain from World War II, so I heard plenty about that. But again, not anything boastful. Yeah, it was a challenging time for them. Now, Bob Keeler is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he's written a new book called Sacred Soldier, and he talks about, because he served in Vietnam, how coming back after Vietnam, people were not warm and fuzzy to the guys who served, and that now he thinks we've gone to the other extreme of thank you for your service. Immediately honor is given to people because they're in the military, and his argument would be that maybe someplace in between, treating people with disrespect and just giving them too much honor without earning it should be examined. And he specifically mentioned, which I thought was true too, most of the mailings I get from people who are in politics, the first thing they say is he's a vet, and that's their primary credential. As someone who has served, do you think we put too much emphasis either on disrespect or respect for people in the military?
Well, I think the emphasis is misplaced when we focus on the vet. We should be focusing on the politician.
Yeah.
I never met a Marine who wanted to be in South Vietnam.
Yeah.
Every Marine I know wanted to be in North Vietnam or go home.
Yeah.
You either fight it and you make a commitment or you take away. I never understood veterans who were upset with Kaepernick, who took a knee in a peaceful protest. He didn't riot. He actually asked people, how can I do this in a respectful way? Now, that's exactly what we wore a uniform for. Yeah. So you could protest against the government without getting a bayonet shoved in your gut.
Yeah.
Now, these same guys are trying to condone somebody attacking the Capitol with Confederate flags, Nazi flags, and trying to hang the vice president of the United States. I am at a loss. I don't know what to tell you that. I think anybody who serves deserves, at least he put his life on the line for his beliefs, and I respect that. Whether they get too much or whether we got too little out of Vietnam, all I know is if there's a vet in trouble, I'm on the National Veterans Foundation board, and I help with 20 to 22 vets a day commit suicide. Wow. And I do on the hotline, and I understand what they're going through. You got to remember, our fathers, everybody thinks, World War II ended and they came home. It took months to get home. What they didn't realize, that was all group therapy. Yeah. You were hanging, you were coming back on a ship, you were hanging with men who had gone through the same experience. Vietnam, there was a great actor, Jim Handy, a good friend of mine. He saw his squad wiped out. And while they were putting bodies on the chopper, they said, "Hey, Handy, you got an early out." He only had 30 days to go. And within 72 hours of seeing most of his buddies killed, he was walking the streets of Queens. He was out of the service. He heard a backfire and jumped through a window.
Oh,
He always said if it wasn't for acting, I'd probably have been an alcoholic, you know.
yeah.
Charles Durning always said that about World War II. Acting is what saved him because it was a therapy thing.
Because he went through so much. You mentioned Mike Pence. We had him on a couple of months ago, and whether you agree or disagree with his politics, I admire the fact that he will not endorse Trump. And that's not to say he's embarrassed by the policies of when he was vice president, but because of what you're talking about in terms of January 6th, he will not. And so many other Republicans have fallen into line. I respect Mike for his integrity on that one. Let me ask you too,
Well,
because
again, once again, I remember I was too young to remember when Eisenhower ran against Adlai Stevens the first time, but I was like 9 years old when he ran the second time.
right,
And my father, very, union leader, a teamster, a Democrat, loved Franklin Roosevelt, but he was a World War II veteran.
mm-hmm.
I remember him looking at a poster of Ike and Adlai Stevenson and putting his arm around me and saying, "Two good men. We're going to be okay."
Yeah,
I felt that way about Obama and McCain.
right, right.
Not agreed with everything that either of them said, but I
Yeah.
knew they were two good men.
Yes.
And I don't feel that now. Joe Biden's a great guy. He was McCain's best friend,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't feel that about Trump. I just don't
Yeah.
feel a good man. I can take anything if I feel the intent is for all of us. The golden rule, right?
Dan Lauria is our guest. I am one of those 70% Dan who would rather that there were two other people to choose from this year. I just think both of them have done what they had to do and they should move off the national stage. Dan Lauria, for those who know him, and everyone does because he's been around for a while doing everything, but Dan, you can do comedy and you can do drama. You can make us laugh, make us cry. You can write plays as you're doing now with Just Another Day. I mentioned these talents and gifts and abilities. You played a good game of football and you served your country and all that. You have multiple talents and abilities. I want to go with the Derek Jeter question, as I call it. When we had Jeter on, I said, every American kid wants to be an American baseball hero. You got it all. Why would God give it all to you? And he said, I don't know, but I'm not going to ask him. I don't want to change his mind. In the same way, you got these gifts. You know that they're given to you. You said, for instance, this ability to memorize and see something and keep it. All these gifts and abilities given to Dan Lauria. Do you have any idea why God gave you these particular gifts?
I don't think anyone would know the answer to that, but I would like to believe that the reason why I was given, I've had a great life, I always like when they say, is there anything, your regret? I said, I got 5 regrets since I woke up this morning. I don't know. But I just feel that when we're given something, it's because God wants us to do something with it to help others. All the things you've mentioned, I'm very happy. I'm glad you know them. I'm glad the public knows them. But in 1972, I was the National Big Brother of the Year. I am on my 5th little brother, paid his way through high school. He graduates tomorrow. I can't be there because I'm going to be in a play.
Right.
But I would not have been able to do that if I wasn't given the opportunity to, make a name for myself. I wouldn't be able to help my fellow veterans if I didn't have a name. And I think that has something to do with, being able to memorize and being able to do Lombardi or Christmas Story on stage. I think God says, well, I throw him a crumb, he's going to split it and share it with them.
You use that talent very well. Now, let me ask you too, was the pandemic a time for you in which you remained able to be creative? Did you find creative outlets or would you just
even during the pandemic, Charles Durning, who was my mentor, he said if I ever went a year without doing a play, he'd never speak to me. And even though he got passed, I did a play. I did two plays during the pandemic. One was on video with Wendy Malick, and then we did the play "The Guys" to raise money for firemen, about, I don't know, 10 times for different fire stations around the country. So I've never gone a year without doing a play.
Okay, so you kept busy even in that time. So a young guy or gal steps forward and goes to the veteran, Dan Lauria, and says, I'm told that you're going to probably be rejected 95 to 97% of the time for any role you out for. And I don't know if I can deal with disappointment or rejection. You've worked an awful lot, Dan, but what do you say to the young creative person who thinks they want to act, but doesn't think they can handle the necessary acceptance of, I'm not going to get every part I go for?
Well, again, I had Charles Durning saw everything I ever did from the day I started, and at the end, Jack Klugman and I gave the eulogies at both their.
Oh, okay.
But I always say to them, that has nothing to do with acting, whether they don't hire you. Like Charles Durning said, you never audition. You got 5 minutes to act today. Never look at it as an audition. You act. They don't hire you. That's their business. And you got to remember, when Charles Durning went up for a role, he was going up against Dolph Sweet and Kenny McMillan, all these great actors. And when I go up, I can tell you who's going to be in a room, well, before self-tape. And they're all great actors. But I never sat there and went, oh, I wonder if they want him or him. All I knew is I had 5 minutes to act.
Yeah.
And I do a lecture at college, and I tell people, if you come to New York City and I'm 85 years old and I'm your waiter, don't feel sorry for me, because I'll have a flyer in my pocket for the play I'm doing. So if you don't approach it with that, Charlie and I never understood young kids, talented kids who would say, well, I'm going to give it 5 years.
Right.
5 years. Charlie had a picture on his mantle of him and another actor outside of Macy's selling ties. Charlie was 47. The other actor was 46. The next year, Charlie Durning got championship season.
Mm-hmm.
And the next year, that other actor got The Godfather, was Abe Vigoda.
Isn't that amazing, too? I'm glad you're talking so much about Charlie, who people don't know what an incredible human being as well as actor he was. I promised not to keep you longer. And again, for our listeners and watchers.
Oh, no, I'm loving this. This is great.
For anybody listening and watching, would you please do me the favor of going to see Just Another Day? But Dan, I want to ask you, we keep going back and forth between the arts and the state of the world, state of our country. I like to follow up with, first guest I ever interviewed 100 years ago was the actor Frank Capra, and the director Frank Capra.
Yeah.
And of course, my favorite, like many, is It's a Wonderful Life.
Wonderful Life.
So many films. But there's that opening scene, what's wrong with George Bailey? Is he sick? No, worse than that. He's discouraged. A lot of people in our country, a lot of people in the world are discouraged, whether you're talking about Ukraine or the Holy Land or Taiwan or in America, this incredible division between our people in our country. So Dan Lauria, who's not only a great actor and writer, but also a citizen who takes seriously his public role, how do you keep hope alive when we're living in such discouraging times?
Well, I don't want to be too philosophical, but I think to keep hope alive, you got to look inward first.
Okay.
You have to say, what have I done to make this a little better place? Like right now, I think that my play, like the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
Every time that's shown, the world's a little better place. Yeah. I think it should be mandatory. Maybe every day we should wake up and look at that movie and say, what have we done for someone else?
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people that, I know it's very hard. We're so divided. It's very hard to sit down and talk. I've lost good friends over politics right now. I mean, how do you deny climate change when your house is floating away from you?
Right.
I'm a little lost. I don't know how you can do that. I don't. But I do know that I love Laura Dern and my friend Wendy Malick, because they speak so much about how can we communicate with people. We have more in common than we do differences. Everybody wants their children safe. Everybody wants to live in a cleaner world. Everybody wants to make a decent living. These are all things we have in common, and we should be able to have common ground. That that's what I liked about making the Reagan movie and playing Tip O'Neill, because Ronald Reagan, regardless of what was said publicly, was all party line publicly.
Right.
They would be two Irishmen having a beer afterwards, and they would get things done. And they said the same thing about Johnson, LBJ, that in the back room, no matter what was said up front, in the back room, they got down, they'd open that bottle of brandy and bourbon, and they would get things done. And I think there's still a possibility of that if the right people are in charge. That governor from Idaho recently, I think he's a Republican. I may not agree with all his, but I think he's one of those guys that might want to sit down with a Joe Biden and say, how can we get stuff done?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're onto something there. Maybe 3 weeks ago, our guest was Patty Davis, Ronald Reagan's daughter, and she talked about that role you played. That she said it's really true that Tip O'Neill came in and prayed at my father's side.
But he was shot.
Yeah.
It's one of the best scenes in the movie. It's
good. When are we going to see that one? When is Reagan coming out, or is it out?
Well, I think it's on the Showbiz channel this month or next month. And yeah, they're advertising it now. It took a while for it to come out.
That the Democratic Speaker of the House went and prayed at the side of a Republican president who'd been shot. I can't imagine that happening now with these present-day candidates, but I love that we once came from a country like that, and you're saying we can, with the grace of God, get back to that. For our listeners and watchers, just another day playing in May and June in New York City. Dan's handiwork as both writer and actor. Dan, thanks so much for being on Personally Speaking. You are the light.
Anytime. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You've been probably listening to this show on the Catholic channel at 129 on Sirius XM. But we're also seen on YouTube. Search under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. In addition to acting as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking, I'm also the pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Massapequa Park, New York, where we post daily Mass on YouTube. So please join us at Mass, as well as on our interview program, Personally Speaking. Please share and let others know about Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.